It was a family tradition. Every summer, my parents would take me to the beach. It was a small, secluded spot far from the crowded, touristy places most people went to. I always looked forward to those trips. There was something magical about the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the smell of salt in the air, and the feeling of the warm sand between my toes. On our last vacation there, I remember the sky being the clearest I'd ever seen, the sun hanging heavy over the horizon. The whole trip had been perfect, days spent collecting seashells, building sandcastles, and swimming in the ocean with my parents watching from their towels. But even as a kid, I had a strange sense of finality, like I knew something was about to change. Maybe it was the way my parents were acting, more quiet than usual, or the fact that they told me this would probably be our last vacation there. They didn't say why, but I had a feeling it was because we couldn't afford it anymore. The last day of the trip, we stayed on the beach until sunset. As the light faded and the sky turned purple, my parents told me it was time to pack up. I was reluctant to leave, not just because I wanted to keep playing, but because I had a strange, almost instinctual feeling that this was the last time I would see this place. That night, back in the rented beach house, I couldn't sleep. My parents had fallen asleep quickly in their room, exhausted from the long day. I stared out the window, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water, casting ghostly reflections. It was so peaceful, yet I felt a knot of unease growing in my chest. Something about the night was different. It wasn't just that it was our last night here, there was something else, something I couldn't explain. I turned over in bed, hoping sleep would eventually come, but just as my eyes began to droop, I heard it, a sound like a gust of wind rushing past my window. Except it didn't come from outside. It came from the closet. I froze, my heart pounding. The wind sound came again, cold and sharp, like it was blowing straight from the ocean. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric inside the closet, like something was brushing against my clothes. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the window was open and the wind had found its way inside. Maybe it was just my imagination. But I knew that wasn't true. I slowly pushed the covers aside and tiptoed to the closet. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened it, I expected to see nothing but clothes hanging limply, maybe swaying slightly from the wind. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. The closet wasn't empty. Inside was the beach. Not just any beach, our beach. The one we had just left earlier that day. But it was different now. The sand looked darker, almost black, and the waves were much more violent than they had been. I could hear the roar of the ocean, smell the salt, feel the wind whipping at my face. It was all there, right in my bedroom closet. I stepped back, heart racing, but something inside me urged me forward. I didn't know what it was, curiosity, fear, or maybe something deeper, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped through the closet and onto the sand. The moment my feet touched the ground, the air around me changed. The warmth of the day was gone, replaced by a chilling breeze that made me shiver. I looked around, half expecting to see my parents nearby, but I was alone. The beach stretched out endlessly in both directions, but there were no lights, no people, just the dark waves crashing against the shore. I wanted to turn back, but when I glanced over my shoulder, the closet was gone. My bedroom was gone. There was nothing but more beach. Panic rose in my throat, but I forced it down. I had to find a way back. I began to walk, my footsteps sinking into the soft sand. It was harder to move than I expected, and I quickly became tired, but I kept going. After what felt like hours, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the sand ahead of me. They were small, like a child's, and they seemed to lead straight into the ocean. I followed them, my pulse quickening. As I got closer to the water, the air grew colder. The waves were louder now, crashing violently against the shore. The footprints led straight into the water, stopping just at the edge where the waves lapped at the sand. I stopped, staring at the place where the footprints disappeared into the ocean. A sense of dread washed over me, and for the first time, I felt truly terrified. Whatever had made those footprints was gone, swallowed by the sea. Without thinking, I backed away, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, only that I needed to get away from that spot. I didn't stop until I could no longer hear the sound of the waves. When I finally slowed down, I realized I was back at the beach house. The same one where my parents and I had stayed. The lights were off, and the house looked different, older, more worn down. I approached it cautiously, my hand reaching for the doorknob. The door creaked open, and inside, everything was covered in dust. It looked like no one had lived here for years. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. On the floor, just inside the doorway, was a pile of small bones, half buried in the dust. My breath caught in my throat. They were too small to be an animal's. I didn't wait to find out more. I ran again, this time not stopping until I was back at the closet, the same closet I had stepped through before. It was there, waiting for me, and I stumbled through it, crashing back into my bedroom. The moment I crossed the threshold, the wind died down, the sound of the ocean faded, and everything was still. I slammed the closet door shut, panting. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell my parents. We packed up the next morning and left for home, just as planned. I tried to forget about what happened, to convince myself it was a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Years passed. I went to college, got a job, and moved out of my parents' house. I rarely thought about that night, though sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the sound of the waves, the rustle of the wind through the closet. I did my best to push it out of my mind. Then, just before my first year of college ended, I came home for the summer. My parents had moved to a smaller place, so I stayed in my old bedroom. I didn't think much of it at first. The house seemed just as I remembered it. But that night, as I lay in bed, the wind started up again. It was faint at first, like a distant whisper, but then it grew louder. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and stared at the closet. The door was slightly ajar, and from inside, I could hear the sound of waves. I didn't open it. I couldn't. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the ocean. And I know it's waiting for me.